As indie game developers, we need to create our own assets. Whether it's models, textures, icons, music, or something else, we'll need to jump into other tools outside of Unity. In the past, I've always focused on programming, but I've also always had a passion for 3D art. So in this episode, we'll be getting our hands dirty with 3D modeling. Now, to create the Simon model for this game, I'll be using Blender. I'm currently using Blender 4.0, but the latest version might be different. So to save time, I won't do a deep dive on Blender. We can do some of that in a different video if you'd like. You should follow along with me, and I'll try and be as descriptive as possible, but please pause the video so you don't get lost. Right now, I recommend downloading Blender. So pause the video and head over to blender.org to get the latest version. If you want to download my models instead of doing this section, look in the description below. There'll be a link for you to download directly. If you do continue, what we'll be doing is using basic primitives like cylinders and boxes to create the shapes for our Simon case. After that, we will put them in place and we'll create some basic materials. And then we'll export to Unity and test everything. Let's get started. Okay, so working with Blender can become complicated if you try and learn too much of it at once. So we're going to stay fairly simple. And what you really need to know is that this is kind of your scene view, similar to the scene view within Unity. This up here is your hierarchy view, similar to the hierarchy view within Unity. It shows all of your models within the scene view. And then down here is something similar to your inspector window, which gives you more details on objects. And then you have a little bit of a toolbar here for working within the scene view. And up here on the top left is kind of a more specific toolbar, or maybe it's a more general toolbar that lets you move into different modes while you're in this view. All right, so to begin, I'm going to start a new project by going up to File, New, and General. In the general scene, it automatically starts off with a camera, a cube, and a light. We're not going to use any of these things. So I'm going to hit A to select everything, and I'm going to hit X to delete, and hit delete there. You can also hit the delete key, and that won't bring up a prompt. Now, I'm going to add an object by hitting Shift A. This brings up a menu, and I'll go to Mesh Cylinder. Now, one thing I haven't talked about yet is how to move around in the viewport window. Using the middle mouse button, you can rotate around the center point. Using Shift and the middle mouse button, you can pan. If you ever get lost, you can hit the period key on the numeric keypad, and that will focus in on whatever object you have selected in the hierarchy. Once you have that down, we'll go down to our cylinder, which we've just created, and we're going to change the properties by accessing this bottom left menu, which is over this animation bar. So you can expand it by clicking on the little arrow, and then we're going to go to radius. Now we don't want a radius of 1 meter. That essentially is 3 feet. So we'll split this into a third. We'll do, that should be about 1 foot wide, and then we'll also set the depth to about 1/10 as high. Okay. So again, I'm going to hit the period key to frame this. And now with my middle mouse button, I can look around. Okay, so now that I have my cylinder the size that I want it, I'm going to hit Tab to switch to edit mode. Now you can also come up here to the top left, click the drop down, and switch from object mode to edit mode. And then if you wanted to switch back, you can also hit Tab to go back to object mode. So Tab will pop you in and out. So now that I have my mode selected here, so I'm going to hit 1 on the numeric keypad, so it will move me into the front view. And I'm going to select faces. So up here we have 3 buttons, and these buttons map to 1, 2, and 3. The first button is vertices, the second button is edges, and the third button is faces. If you hit the middle mouse button while you're in the front view or any other orthographic view, it'll put you back into a perspective view. Okay, so I'm going to hit the number 2 on the keyboard, which puts me into edge view. I'll just select this, and then I'm going to hit Control R, and that will give me the ability to add a new cut. Control R is equivalent to this loop cut tool right here on the left in this toolbar. So Control R, and now you can see that if I kind of move around, the loop cut moves around to different areas. I'm going to leave it. I want it to be a horizontal cut, and I'm going to move the mouse scroll wheel up 1, and that'll give me 2 cuts, and actually I can move it up 3. That'll give me 3 cuts. So now I'm going to hit the left mouse button, and then I'll hit the right mouse button to accept their position. Now that I've done that, this menu down here on the bottom left no longer lets me edit the properties for a cylinder, as it's no longer a base cylinder. It's not a parametric object anymore. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to scale these guys out. So I'm going to start by hitting Alt and then left click on each one. Shift left click to add selection. So now that I have these cuts, I'm going to go ahead and scale these out by hitting S to scale. So maybe something like that would be nice. And then I'm going to select this loop by alt clicking the loop, and I'll hit S to scale again, and I'll pop it out right there. And now I want to add just a little bit of detail here of a crease. So I'll go over here to bevel, which is Control B, and I'll just bevel this a little bit. And now we can see that our mesh is starting to look a lot more like the mesh that I was showing you at the beginning here. So now if I Alt Z, you can see out of X-ray mode, you can see that my mesh has a tapered edge. Now I also don't really like seeing the facets. First I'll hit Tab to get out of object mode, or edit mode, and then I will right click on the object and shade smooth. And there you go. This looks a lot smoother. Looks pretty nice. I'm going to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to select faces by hitting the 3 key. Click on the top face, and I will delete that face by hitting delete and then selecting faces. Now, what I want to do is I want to hit 2 to get edges, and then I want to select this top edge, and I'm going to extrude it just a little bit, and then I will scale it in. So now this will bring new faces in towards the center, which I basically want to have a little disc in the middle where there's going to be a logo. And maybe this was a little too wide, so I'll scale this out just a bit. There we go. Now I'm going to hit E to extrude, and I will extrude just a little bit. I want a tapered edge there, and I'm going to scale it just a tiny, tiny bit. And then I will hit E again to extrude it down. And then again, I'm going to extrude it a little bit and scale it in just a little bit. Okay. Now you can see that my extrusions have an angle to them. That's no good. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to extrude, and then I'm going to hit the Z key to explicitly extrude up and down on the Z axis. So again, I'll hit the S key to scale just a tiny bit, and then I'll hit the E and Z to extrude on the Z axis again, and then click, extrude Z down just a tad, and then scale, and then extrude Z, and then scale. I'm going to bring this in, extrude again, Z, just a tiny bit. I'm going to come up, and then scale. Now you don't really have to get this detailed, but now you can see it's staying centered because I'm using the axis alignment with the Z key. So now I'm going to extrude up, and we'll get that Z key pressed. You could see it was starting to move off center there. And I will put this about right there. Looks like it's pretty much in line. And then I can extrude again on the Z, add just a little bit of a bevel here, extrude again, and again we want to use the Z, and then we'll scale it all the way down. And now we can go into vertice mode by hitting 1. We've got all of these selected. We'll right click. We're going to say merge vertices at center, and there we go. Now we should only have one vertice there, and I can move a vertice or anything by hitting G, and I hit escape to undo that move. Okay, so now you can see this is the basic case of the Simon model. So now we need to work on the buttons. So in order to get a button, actually, you know what? Before we do that, I do want to come back here and add a bevel on the top here. So I'm going to do, again, in edge mode, Alt click on this top edge loop, and I will do Control B. And let's see, there we go. I just want a top lip here so that it's not too soft an edge. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now let's get to work on these buttons. So in order to start with the buttons, first we want to make sure we're in object mode up here. We're going to hit Shift A again. We're going to come up here to mesh, and we're going to create a cube. And this cube is huge, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit S to scale it down. And I will hit the 7 on the numeric keypad, and I'm going to just eyeball this, put this in a rough position here. I want it about here, maybe when it's centered between the two edges. I'm going to scale it a little bit more, and then I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis. So actually, you know what? I'm not going to rotate it. Okay, so we have this scaled down. I'm going to hit G to move this and move it up on the Z axis. And I'm just eyeballing this again. Maybe I can put it here. And then I'll scale this on the Z axis just to make it smaller here. And I'll move this down again, G and then Z. And that looks like a good height to me. And then I'll hit period to frame selected. All right, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scale this so it's as wide as a button, and then I'll add detail and add a bend modifier to make this button bend about 90 degrees. So let's go ahead and we'll scale this, hit S and then X, and then just scale it out. And then we'll go into edit mode using tab. We'll hit 2 to select faces. We'll hit Control R to add some edges, and now middle scrolling to add more definition here so that the bend works properly. So I'll go ahead and left click and then right click. In order to bend this properly using the bend modifier, I'm going to add what's called an empty. So if you get out of edit mode by tab, hit Shift A again, and then come down here to empty. You can add whatever you want. I'll add a sphere, and I'll scale this thing down. It's just an empty game object, an empty object within Blender. I'm going to position this empty object in the center of my cube. So I'll just copy each one. Copy and paste. And then copy and paste. And then copy. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. I just don't know it. Paste. Okay. So now this empty object is right in the center of my cube. We can scale this down a little bit. It's not that important how big it is. I'm going to select my cube. I'm going to come over here to the right side, what I compared to the inspector window within Unity, and I'm going to hit this wrench here to go to modifiers. In here, I'll hit add modifier, and I'll go to deform, and I will go to simple deform. I'm going to use bend, and I will bend it on the Z. I'm going to bend this 90 degrees. The reason here is that the origin of our bend is not set to any object. So we're going to set it to the empty object by clicking on this input field and selecting the empty. So now you can see that it is rotating the way I had intended. So it is rotating the wrong way, but it is rotating. So I don't know. I rotated this -90. No. So this takes a little bit of trial and error. So this one is 90. We're going to do -90. And that still didn't work. Okay. Well, not important. The next thing we do here, we have the rotation or the bend in place. We're going to drop down over here in the modifier and hit apply, and that will bake the modifier in place. And I'm deleting my empty. I no longer need that. And I'm going to rotate this on the Z, and I'm going to hit control to be able to lock it to degrees here. You can see up on the top, you just want this to rotate 140. Is that right? Let's have a look in the top view. 140 looks really close, but it's not quite right. 135. All right, so I'm going to just move this with the G tool like that. And I'm going to say that looks good to me. So the next thing we want to do is get 4 buttons. So I'm going to go back to this modifiers panel, and I'm going to go to generate mirror. And we want to mirror on the X and the Y. And we want to use our cylinder as our mirror object. So there we go. We've got our 4 buttons now. However, these buttons are currently one mesh, and we're going to need them to be 4 meshes. But before we go in and make them separate meshes, I want to do some of the same things we did to our case, which essentially is to smooth this out. So we'll go into edit mode by hitting tab, and then we can first select the vertical edges on the corners of our button, and we will control B to bevel them. Let's see, I just want a little bit of bevel there. Okay, and then we will grab the top edges by doing Alt click and Alt Shift click to get everything there. Alt click. Okay, make sure we didn't get anything we don't need. And once again, we'll hit Control B to bevel, and we're just going to do enough so that we don't want to get any overlapping here. Once we get that overlapping, it starts to ruin the mesh. So just a little bit of overlap there. Okay. And if we want, we can then select this edge by Alt clicking it, and we'll hit G to move and then Z to constrain to the Z axis. And I think that looks pretty good to me. So now that we have this looking decent, I'm going to hit tab to get out. I'm going to right click in object mode on our object and hit shade smoothed. And it looks decent. It could be a little higher detail, and if we wanted to do that, we could then add a new modifier under generate subdivision surface, We can subdivide it once maybe. You can see subdividing it does a lot of, well, subdividing with simple on looks like it's pretty good. Okay, so we'll leave it there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bake in my mirror by hitting the apply button. That's also Control A. But I'm just going to do this drop down, hit apply, and then the same thing for subdivisions, apply. And now, as I mentioned before, we have all 4 buttons in one mesh. We're going to want to separate those. So the way we do that is we go back into edit mode. We can do this in the top view by hitting 7 on the numeric keypad. And then click drag to select one of the buttons, and then hit P to separate. And then we're going to separate by selection. So that's one. Oh, I made a mistake. Undo that. So we're going to hit X-ray mode or Alt-Z. X-ray mode there, Alt-Z. And then we'll do a control drag to do a full selection. Hit P and then separate by selection. We'll do the same thing for this one. P, separate by selection. And then finally we'll do the same thing for this one. P, separate by selection. And now we only have one mesh left in this mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and hit tab. Now that we have our buttons created, I'm just going to drag these down by hitting G and then Z. Move them down a little bit so they aren't so big and aren't popping out too much. And I can get out of zoom select, or I can get out of X-ray mode by hitting Alt Z again. Now this is starting to look pretty good to me. Okay, so I'm going to organize my hierarchy so that I understand it. You never want to import a bunch of models called cube or cylinder into Unity. So first I'll rename the collection. This will be Simon Mesh. And now I'm going to go to the cylinder. I'm going to call this Simon Case. And actually we can do something here with the cylinder or the case so that we can simplify another part of this. So this here can be its own mesh as well. And I think the best way to do this would be to just click drag and select that, and then we can do the same thing with P and then remove by selection. So now that created a new object up here. We'll get out of edit mode and we'll click up here and we'll call this center logo. Okay, and then we'll go through and name each button. We can either give them button color names, like button red, green, and yellow, or button 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll do button 1, button 2, button 3, and button 4. Okay, so now we have our model and our hierarchy cleanly made. So I'm going to go ahead and create materials for each one of these. The way you do that is you select the object and then you come down to the material panel in the area that I called the inspector window. You're going to hit new to create a new material, and I'll call this button red. And I will just select a red color for now, and that should be it. Oh, we're not seeing it because we're not in the right render mode. So there are different ways to look at meshes within Blender. On the top right here, there's viewport shading. This is wireframe, this is solid, this is some sort of render material preview, and then this is a rendered view. So we'll just go back into material preview mode and we'll select the next button. I'll hit new. We'll call this button green. We will select a green color here from the color swatch. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. Button yellow. base yellow, and then button blue. There we go. And then I'll come up with a generic case. We'll just call it dark plastic. And we will select something in the blackish range here. And maybe it has a little bit of metallic and definitely some specular, some roughness, but not a lot. Okay, so somewhere in the middle. And then finally we need our logo, which can be, we'll say this is logo disc, which can be a white or a grayish material. And again, maybe it's really shiny or metallic. And that should be it. So we'll go ahead and save this. I'm going to go to Save As, and we'll call this Simon Mesh. And I'll just add tutorial as it's from the tutorial, and hit Save. And now we want to export this for Unity. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to File, Export, and select FBX. And we'll want to find a directory to export this. I'm going to just export it in the same directory. If you do export it to a directory within your Unity project, then anytime you re-export it, it will update within your Unity project, which can be destructive if you're not prepared to import or to export to the same project. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and export this, and then we'll get back into Unity and see how this looks.